Colonel Charles Beauchamp crouched at a crossroads on the western edge of Taejon. It was still dark, July 20th, 1950. Beside him, a two-man team from Charlie Company, 3rd Engineer Combat Battalion, held a weapon none of them had fired in combat. It was a tube, 5 feet long, that had arrived in Korea 10 days earlier on an aircraft from California. Somewhere west of the city, the grinding of diesel engines meant North Korean T-34 tanks were closing on their position. For 25 days, every anti-tank weapon in the American arsenal had failed to stop these machines. Beauchamp had one chance to find out whether this new one would be any different. He told the gunner to hold fire until the lead tank was close enough that missing was not an option. 3 weeks. That is how long the T-34 had owned the Korean War before Beauchamp reached that crossroads. On June 25, 1950, North Korean armor rolled across the 38th parallel and nothing slowed it down. Seoul fell on June 28, 4 days into the invasion. South Korean forces had no tanks and no anti-tank weapons capable of stopping a T-34. The few American units rushed from occupation duty in Japan had bazookas left over from the Second World War, the 2.36-inch M9, a weapon already known to be inadequate against heavy armor. The rockets had been sitting in humid Japanese depots for 5 years. Many failed to detonate. The ones that did could not punch through the T-34's hull at any range. The first American ground troops to fight arrived at Osan on July 5th. Task Force Smith, roughly 540 men from the 21st Infantry Regiment under Lieutenant Colonel Charles B. Smith, dug into the ridges north of the city with 6 bazookas, 2 recoilless rifles, and exactly 6 anti-tank rounds for 1 forward howitzer. Smith had been chosen for the mission partly because he had combat experience from Guadalcanal. Most of his men did not. They were young, many under 21, and their longest deployment had been occupation duty in Japan, where the daily routine revolved around inspections, not field exercises. Smith himself later admitted their training had been almost non-existent. When the ammunition officer had loaded out at the depot in Sasebo, Japan, he requisitioned every anti-tank round available. The depot had 18. Smith got 6. That was the entire anti-tank capability of the 1st American Combat Force in Korea. The T-34s of the 107th Tank Regiment appeared on the highway at 7:30 that morning. The forward howitzer hit 2, setting 1 on fire. Then the anti-tank rounds ran out. Second Lieutenant Ollie Connor grabbed a 2.36-inch bazooka, crawled to within 15 yards of a T-34, close enough to see the rivets on its hull, and fired 22 rockets into its rear armor. Every round bounced off. Task Force Smith was overrun. Roughly 150 men were killed, wounded, or missing. 3 days later at Chonan, Colonel Robert Martin, who had been in command of the 34th Infantry Regiment for approximately 14 hours, picked up a bazooka and went after a T-34 himself. The tank's 85mm cannon killed him before he could fire a second round. He was awarded the first Distinguished Service Cross of the Korean War. He died using a weapon that could not have saved him no matter how close he got. The man behind the tanks was Major General Ryu Kyong Su. Born in Manchuria in 1915, Ryu had served in a Soviet tank unit during the Second World War and trained in Red Army armor schools. He built North Korea's armored force from scratch, starting in 1948 with 2 T-34s and 30 Soviet instructors. By June of 1950, his 105th Armored Brigade fielded roughly 120 T-34-85 tanks, organized into 3 regiments, the 107th, the 109th, and the 203rd. His crews had trained on their machines for years. The T-34-85 had built a fearsome reputation on the Eastern Front, the tank that had helped break the Wehrmacht at Kursk in 1943 and driven west to Berlin. Its frontal armor was sloped at 60 degrees, effectively doubling its protection against incoming fire. Its 85mm gun could punch through 100mm of steel at 1,000 meters. Its diesel engine resisted the catastrophic fires that plagued gasoline-powered American tanks. Ryu had every reason to expect that his brigade would reach Busan before the Americans could field anything capable of stopping him. South Korean forces had no tanks and no effective anti-tank capability. The American divisions in Japan had been stripped of medium armor during post-war demobilization. His T-34s could advance straight down the Korean highway system without fear of encountering a weapon that could pierce their hulls. and for 3 weeks, that is exactly what they did. He was nearly right, and not by accident. After 1945, the United States gutted its own military with a speed that now seems reckless. The army shrank from roughly 8 million men at the end of the Second World War to 684,000 by 1947. 89 divisions were reduced to 12. The 4 divisions stationed in Japan had no medium tanks whatsoever, only light M24 Chaffies, whose 75mm guns the T-34 could ignore at any distance. Training budgets had been slashed, equipment had rusted, and the one infantry weapon designed to kill a tank like the T-34 had been shelved before it ever reached the troops who needed it. The 3.5-inch M20 Super Bazooka had been developed in late 1944, built specifically to answer the problem of heavy enemy armor. It fired a 9-pound shaped charge rocket capable of penetrating up to 280mm of steel. The T-34's thickest armor plate was 90mm. It was not a close contest, but the M20 never reached the front lines before the Second World War ended. In the budget slashing that followed, Secretary of Defense Louis Johnson killed its widespread production. Its ammunition had been in standardized manufacture for only 15 days when the Korean War started. The weapon that could have saved the men at Osan and Chonan, and every position in between, was sitting in a stateside depot while soldiers were dying with rockets that bounced off like thrown stones. On July 3, 1950, General Douglas MacArthur sent a request from Tokyo for the 3.5-inch launcher. 5 days later, on July 8th, the first crate of M20 Super Bazookas was loaded onto a transport aircraft at Travis Air Force Base in California. An instruction team flew with them. They reached Taejon around July 10th. Selected soldiers from the battered 24th Infantry Division began training on July 12th, learning to load and fire a weapon most of them had never seen. They had 8 days before the North Korean tanks arrived at the city. Which brings us back to that crossroads in the pre-dawn dark. Beauchamp's team heard the T-34 before they saw it. The sound of a diesel engine and steel treads on packed earth. The lead tank came around a bend in the road, heading east into the city. The gunner raised the M20, lined up the shot, and squeezed the trigger. The rocket struck the T-34's hull and punched clean through. The tank caught fire. The crew bailed out and were captured alive. 25 days of American impotence against the T-34 ended in a single trigger pull at a crossroads outside Taejon. Within the hour, the same team and a second bazooka squad from the 24th Reconnaissance Company knocked out 2 more T-34s on the approach roads. By midday, North Korean armor was pushing into Taejon from multiple directions, and the 24th Division was fighting for its life. Then something happened that no one in the chain of command could have anticipated. Major General William F. Dean, the division commander, a 2-star general whose job was to direct the battle from a command post, took a bazooka team into the streets to hunt tanks himself. He directed his gunners into firing positions, guided them onto targets, and personally destroyed 1 T-34 with a hand grenade after his team had disabled it. Dean reportedly said afterward that he got himself a tank. By the end of July 20th, American forces had destroyed approximately 10 T-34s in and around Taejon. 8 of those kills were credited to the 3.5-inch bazooka on its first day of combat. Taejon fell anyway. The sheer weight of the North Korean advance overwhelmed the defenders. The 24th Division suffered more than 3,600 killed and wounded. Nearly 3,000 were captured. Among them was General Dean. He was separated from his unit during the withdrawal and spent 36 days evading North Korean patrols on foot before he was caught on August 25th. He would remain a prisoner of war for the next 3 years. The Medal of Honor, the first awarded in the Korean War, was pinned to his actions on July 20th at Taejon. He did not learn about it until after his release in 1953. But the weapon Dean had carried into those streets changed everything that came after. By August, more than 900 M20 Super Bazookas had been distributed across the Busan perimeter. South Korean forces received their first batch in early August and destroyed 4 T-34s on August 9th, the very first day they used the weapon. The effect on North Korean tactics was immediate. For 3 weeks, their tank commanders had sent T-34s down roads without infantry escort because nothing American troops carried could scratch them. Now every ditch and doorway and pile of rubble could hide a two-man team with a tube that would burn through their thickest armor at 70 yards. North Korean commanders pulled their tanks back from the spearhead. The armored fist that had driven 120 kilometers in 10 days stalled along the Naktong River and never recovered its momentum. The psychological shift was as significant as the tactical one. American infantry had spent 3 weeks fighting around T-34s, retreating from them, dying under their treads. Now a private with a tube on his shoulder could face one head-on and win. North Korea had committed roughly 150 T-34 tanks on June 25th, drawn from the 105th Armored Brigade and the 208th Tank Training Regiment. By early August, after losses well over 100, only about 40 remained combat-capable along the front. By September 15th, the day MacArthur's amphibious landings at Incheon severed their supply lines from behind, the North Korean armored force had effectively ceased to exist. A post-war United States Army survey documented 119 tank versus tank engagements during the Korean War and confirmed 97 T-34 kills. Airstrikes claimed the largest share of total tank losses, but at the infantry level, in the positions where riflemen had spent 3 weeks watching T-34s roll past them with nothing to shoot back, it was the M20 that gave them a fighting chance. Major General Ryu Kyong Su was reassigned to the 3rd Infantry Division in August of 1950 and later commanded the 3rd Army. He died on November 19, 1958. The North Korean government named his old unit in his honor. It is now the 105th Guards Seoul Ryu Kyong Su Armored Division, and it remains active. In March of 2024, Kim Jong-un personally visited the division, praised it as a model for the entire Korean People's Army, and ordered it to prepare for war. William Dean returned home in 1953 after 3 years in captivity. He accepted the Medal of Honor and largely withdrew from public life. He never sought credit for what happened at Taejon, and few histories give him more than a paragraph. The border between North and South Korea sits where it has sat since 1953, 73 years, the longest armed standoff of the modern era, built on the question of whether one side can stop whatever the other sends south. In the summer of 1950, the answer to that question was a 9-pound rocket in a wooden crate, loaded onto an aircraft, 5 days after someone finally thought to ask for it. It flew 6,000 miles across the Pacific and landed in the hands of men who had never seen it before. 8 days later, a combat engineer pulled the trigger at a crossroads outside a city that would burn to the ground before nightfall. And the war turned, not because of a general's strategy or a fleet in the harbor, but because someone finally put the right weapon into the hands of the men doing the fighting.